Hello, and thank you for coming along. Today we're going to look at Malthus and the Anthropocene, the agricultural collapse of complex civilizations. We're going to focus this in particular in reference to the latest food reports from the UN World Food Program and its director, David Beasley. Malthus and the Anthropocene. Sir David Attenborough powerfully restated the Malthusian perspective years ago in his 2011 address to the Royal Society in London. As he phrased it, Thomas Malthus observed in 1798 that, quote, there cannot be more people on this earth than can be fed. It was a powerful speech, and it's worth looking it up in the notes in the YouTube section below.
Sir David Attenborough has been very powerful in pointing this out, most notably in the last meeting of the Royal Society in London under the presidency of the Duke of Edinburgh. Sir David Attenborough gave a very clear restatement of the Malthusian dilemma that we all face.
There have been prophets who've warned us of this impending disaster, of course. One of the first was Thomas Malthus. His most important book, an essay of the principle of population, was published over 200 years ago in 1798. In it, he argued that the human population would increase inexorably until it was halted by what he called misery and vice. Today, for some reason, that prophecy seems to be largely ignored, or at any rate disregarded. It's true that he did not foresee the so-called Green Revolution, which greatly increased the amount of food that can be produced in any given area of arable land. And there may be other advances in our food-producing skills that we ourselves still can't foresee. But such advances only delay things. The fundamental truth that Malthus proclaimed remains the truth. There cannot be more people on this earth than can be fed.
He concluded with a summation of the Malthus point of view that made it clear the current strategies of African food production will not meet, because they cannot meet, the current projected trajectories of Africa's and the world's food needs.
Many people would like to deny that this is so. They would like to believe in that oxymoron, sustainable growth. Kenneth Boulding, President Kennedy's environmental advisor 45 years ago, said something about this. Anyone who believes in indefinite growth in anything physical on a physically finite planet, he said, is either mad or an economist.
Quote, there cannot be more people on this earth than can be fed. It was a powerful speech, and it's worth looking it up in the notes in the YouTube section below. We all recognize this to be true. Indeed, it is a truism. But therein lies the problem. It is simultaneously so obvious and so ominous that both personally and collectively, we choose to ignore the insight rather than embrace it because of all of its troubling implications. If we expect to continue to be part of the complex and ever-evolving ecosystems on our planet, we had better pay attention quickly to some non-negotiable realities of how that system works and why we cannot survive the trajectories we have set for ourselves within it. To begin then, we need now, as a species, to rethink our place in space. We have now to come to a collective realization that as a species, we live within a planetary ecosystem that we did not create, cannot control, and must not destroy. What is more, it seems that Earth is the only life-supporting planet in the known universe. This is a sobering fact about the precariousness of our place in space, especially because the agricultural practices upon which the world's human population depends are now themselves predominantly based on non-renewable resources. Our problem can be put quite simply. Any society that bases its primary production system, that is, its agriculture, upon non-renewable resources will itself, in time, not be renewed. This is a sobering realization in its own right. Yet even more disturbing is the fact that in spite of all that scientists now know about our vulnerable circumstance, and despite our very best intentions, the social, economic, and political institutions of our contemporary world are committed to operate in their default mode, that is, just on automatic, so as to destroy the prospects for our future survival within the constraints of Earth's ecosystem. Starkly put, then, the question is simply this: can humans survive the Anthropocene? If we fail to redirect our institutions away from their default modes of perpetual growth, no amount of technological wizardry will spare us from the system-wide collapse toward which our global food system is now headed. Our problem is compounded by the universal phenomena of chronocentrism, the belief that the normal state of the world corresponds to what it has existed in my time, that is, my chronological time, the period of time I can remember, or the recent past I can be told about by close relatives. For example, in demographic terms, the world's population has tripled during the lifetime of anyone born in the immediate post-World War II period, who is still alive today. For someone born in 1945 or for 1946, for instance, the global population has grown from roughly 2.5 billion people in 1945 to roughly 7.5 billion people today. For those born less than 20 years earlier, say in 1927, when the world population was 2 billion people, and who are still alive today, the world's population has increased nearly fourfold in their lifetimes. Quite naturally, for those who have lived over this span in Earth history, it's common for them to think of this time as normal. Yet it is not. In fact, this interval proves to be a highly exceptional moment in both human history and Earth history. The total human population will never again triple or quadruple in the lifespan of any one individual. That is to say, it will not continue to expand from its current size of roughly 7.5 billion to over 22 billion, and certainly not to 32 billion in the lifetime of someone born today who lives to the age of 75 or 80 years old. To put it another way, our recent past is not a reliable guide to the foreseeable future. You can see this if you graph this out, because what's at stake here is an exponential process. Global population has tripled in the lifetime of many adults still alive today, born shortly after World War II and still alive in 2022. Having grown up on a food supply subsidized heavily by fossil fuels and the Green Revolution inspired by the work of Norman Borlaug, we have lost an understanding of the fundamental ecological principles of past civilizations and consequently destroyed our ability to conceive of alternative ways of structuring a survivable future. Never have so many people come to depend upon fewer and fewer species of plants grown by ever-expanding agrotech corporations on petro-intensive mega-farms in rural areas at greater and greater distances from the points of expanding urban consumption. Think of the energetics at every stage of that process. Norman Borlaug was responsible for the breakthroughs in scientific techniques of dwarfing plants, that is, selectively breeding plants for their dwarf features so that more energy could be put into their stalks of grain, heads of grain, rather than the supporting biological stalks. This seemed to be a remarkable increase in the grain heads produced per acre, and it was called the Green Revolution for this reason. It's important to look carefully at the Green Revolution, though, its essence, its achievements, and its aftermath, because in a very short period of time, it swept across the entire world. Norman Borlaug himself received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 as a recognition of his massive impact on the world's growing population, making it possible for hundreds of millions of people to live who would have otherwise faced very severe constraints. This entire structure of the world's food system has only been made possible by an ever-increasing consumption of various forms of non-renewable fossilized fuels, whose availability is becoming more expensive at the same time that the impact of combusting these fuels is releasing both carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane on a scale that threatens global ecosystem stability. Moreover, these emissions work to heighten the frequency and severity of extreme weather. Events like floods and droughts are on the increase, and these in turn undermine the stability of agricultural production. These escalating and self-reinforcing trends are not, nor can they ever be, a recipe for global food system security. In the full light of the emerging ecological and system sciences, it has become apparent that the trends set in motion by the engineers of the Green Revolution did not solve the Malthusian problem. On the contrary, their, quote, solutions merely postpone the food production population problem, amplifying it and projecting it to troubling global proportions. While all famines and food shortages are local, the breakdown of the modern world's food system is now truly global because of the expansion of the Green Revolution. As the war in the Ukraine clearly underscores, disruptions in the global flow of petroleum, fertilizer, or other agricultural inputs, tractors, for example, mechanisms, irrigation systems, or similar disruptions in the flow of grain as harvests, surpluses, and stockpiles powerfully affects the livelihoods or survival of populations often halfway around the world. Food production is no longer local, it's global and circulates globally with all of its inputs, and all of its harvested outputs. The colonial legacy and Cold War enthusiasm for what became known as growth economics, combined with the pervasive public misunderstanding of the petro-intensive quote-unquote magic of the Green Revolution, has meant that the modern cultures all over the world are on a collision course with Earth's finite ecosystem. These interconnected crises are accelerating as the global food system is becoming ever more dependent upon fossil fuel combustion. At the same time, recurrent pandemics afflict the world's poorest agricultural populations with increasing severity, and extreme weather and changes in the climate stress food production and global supply chains beyond the breaking point. During the heady years of the Green Revolution, when the fanciful ideologies of perpetual growth dominated the writings of public intellectuals and academics alike, it became fashionable to sneer at the insights of physicists like Al Bartlett, sociologists like William Catton, or MIT authors of the 1972 Club of Rome report known as The Limits to Growth, dismissing these people derisively as neo-Malthusians, in quotes. But the fact is that 50 years later, these same authors and a few exceptional and visionary economists like E.F. Schumacher, Kenneth Boulding, and Herman Daly, who took their insights very seriously, have been proven to be correct. They have been the prophets, proving the wizards wrong. The tragedy is that we, as a collective species, treat soil like dirt. Topsoil, climate change, and the collapse of civilizations is an old theme in archaeology and in cultural history. In fact, it provides the drumbeat of the rise and fall of kingdoms from the earliest recorded history right through to the present day. The reason is that topsoil is a very thin layer on top of a substrate of rock. In reality, there is nothing neo about Malthusianism. In our day, the fundamental research of both ecologists and sociologists alike has led to a radical reassessment of the Green Revolution, leaving us with troubling new questions. As the title of one recent essay phrased it, how could something so right turn out wrong? How could something so good go bad? This is what the challenge of Sir David Attenborough to the legacy of Norman Borlaug has been. Sir David Attenborough is probably the world's leading spokesman for ecological perspectives on the global circumstance in which we find ourselves. And from his perspective, and those who've gathered around his perspective, the Green Revolution is quite problematic. The narrative is a tragic story of the modern world's love affair with the Green Revolution. Analysts like Dr. Vandana Shiva has pointed out that the Green Revolution may have created more harm than good when looked at in long-term perspective. The tragedy is that in less than a century, the Green Revolution converted and consolidated countless solar-based systems of agriculture into a capital-intensive, petro-dependent global food system, which cannot provide a sustainable future for humankind. Hailed as a remarkable success of human ingenuity in the middle and late 20th century, this quote-unquote revolution may yet prove to be the biggest misstep in the history of civilization, leaving billions of people to experience heightened food insecurity or death as the global climate changes in ways we cannot predict. How could this have happened? Well, it happened essentially because of the way in which petro-intensive agriculture destroys, not just ignores, and not just neglects, but actually destroys topsoil, which is our upper limiting resource. As a human species, we do not photosynthesize. Plants photosynthesize. We have to become very attentive very quickly to what plants need to grow. In sustainable terms, they need a healthy topsoil, an ecosystem unto itself, which is maintained through countless billions of species working constantly to break down organic matter and mineral and deliver them to the roots of plants required for human existence. The fatal consequences of misplaced metaphors of industry are very apparent. In fact, some of our billionaires, like Bezos and others, seem to think that they can go off into space and create environments as if they were industrial plants that could be just taken off of the Earth's surface and put into capsules surrounding the Earth. Some of this is so fanciful it's hard to take seriously. But billionaires are spending billions of dollars in trying to convert agriculture from a basic biological process into an industry to keep alive the delusion of infinite growth in a finite ecosystem. Guess what? Can't work, won't work. We need to reassess, as we've said, our place in space. We live on the only blue planet in the known universe. There is no planet B. We only have one Earth. We only get one chance. What should our place in space be? How long do you think we can live elsewhere without an enormous subsidy of food, oxygen, and eventually topsoil to produce the food supplies we require, since we do not photosynthesize? There is no soil on the moon. There is no soil on Mars. Yet we're spending billions of dollars to try to get to both places. How long do we think we can live there without substantial subsidies from the only blue planet in the known universe? Do we think we can survive days, hours, minutes, seconds, perhaps nanoseconds without the entire Earth-like environments which we try to transport there to keep a few individuals alive for a few moments? This is not realistic, nor is it rational. Yet, many countries are devoting billions of dollars and committing future plans to colonize the moon and move on to Mars. It's a simple fact, and it's been demonstrated again and again, that in the past, no known ecosystem has ever been, nor in the future can it ever be engineered to deliver ever-increasing benefits to only one of its constituent species in perpetuity. In short, infinite growth for the human population is simply not on. In striving to reach this goal, increasing the human population without limit, the species in an ecosystem, not only the human species, but any species within a finite ecosystem, destroys the system itself, devours it. We will be no exception to this fundamental law of biological system. We cannot survive apart from nature. Our last, best, and only chance of survival is to live as a part of nature, within the constraints of a solar-powered, finite planetary ecosystem. Vain techno-fixes or misguided hopes of finding breakthrough new energy sources, as well as desperate attempts to win, quote-unquote, battles over the control of dwindling non-renewable resources, can and will only hasten our demise as a species. Scientists are setting the record straight. We're a subset of an ecosystem, not apart from it, nor dominant within it, because we do not photosynthesize. We depend on billions of other organisms to keep that photosynthesis sustainable for our own interest, for our own survival. This was well recognized at the beginning of the scientific revolution. Sir Francis Bacon, one of the founders of the principles of scientific research, stated it very clearly back in 1620, the year some settlers arrived in what was called the New World to create new environments. As he put it, nature to be commanded must be obeyed. Chilling observation for those of us who think and have come to think that in our lifetime we've conquered nature. Not so, can't be so, won't be so. This is the basic insight that Malthus can offer us in the Anthropocene. There cannot be more people on this earth than can be fed. To feed them, we need a sustainable, solar-based agriculture, dependent upon billions of species to keep us alive. The director of the World Food Program has been making the rounds around the world to world leaders, and specifically to the United Nations itself, to appeal to world leaders to the hell on earth warning about food shortages that are going to hit within the next few months, and certainly within the next year.
We're facing a food pricing problem in 2022 that's creating havoc around the world. Well, if we don't get on top of this thing quickly, and I don't mean next year, I mean this year, you will have a food availability problem in 2023, and that's going to be hell on earth. We're looking at an $11 billion shortfall of food production inside Africa alone. Now I can go to Central America, South America, same issues on droughts. India, devastated by heat. in drought, and it can go on and on. The world produces enough food to feed everybody on the planet, over 7.7 billion people. 50% of that food is because of fertilizer. So if you don't have fertilizer, you can't have harvest at the yields that you need. The fertilizers that we're talking about, number one, China's got a complete export ban on fertilizer. Number two, the number two producer of fertilizer in the world is Russia. And they are struggling to get the fertilizer out. I'm asking world leaders, I don't care how you feel about Russia, China, or anything, fertilizers have got to move to bring food security to the rest of the world. Otherwise, there's going to be chaos all over the world. The other factor is inflation and the value of the dollar. Because the value of the dollar is so strong now, it's offset any movement we've had in the poor countries with regards to food pricing. We were able to avert famine in the last couple of years as I went to the leaders of the world, said if you don't respond, you will have catastrophe on catastrophe, is particularly in the height of COVID. And the leaders did respond. We averted famine. But then Ukraine comes on, shutting down the breadbasket of the world that produces enough food to feed 400 million people.
He's warned of a hell on earth because of food shortages. As he says, I don't mean next year, I mean this year, we have to act. He's the executive director of the UN World Food Program and sees the crises emerging around the world. His solution has been to ask for more nitrogen fertilizer, saying that more than 50% of the world's food is grown with that fertilizer. The problem is that that itself is not sustainable. It takes enormous quantities of fossil fuels to make it work, to obtain it in the first place, to then deliver it, to apply it, and its outcome is one of ecological disaster. It releases nitrous oxide to the atmosphere, which is a more potent greenhouse gas than CO2 itself. So any growth system based on the continuous use and expansion of nitrogen fertilizer is itself suicidal. We need now to turn to sustainable solutions based on restored ecosystems, healthy soils, which cycle nutrients with the help of billions of organisms in the topsoil. This is why Malthus and the Anthropocene is very relevant to us today, because we're facing, in its default mode, a production system which is designed to grow without limit. And yet, all ecosystems impose limits. No species can grow infinitely within an ecosystem that is finite without destroying that system itself. We will be no exception to this basic biological law.